The wind had a way of screaming through the Sacramento mountains, not whistling, not moaning, screaming. It was the kind of sound that made men turn back toward the valley before nightfall, the kind that sent coyotes diving for their dens and left the world sharp as broken glass. Cassian Red Elk had heard that wind most of his life, but tonight it carried something else with it. Something thin, fragile, wrong. A cry. He reined in his horse so suddenly the gelding stamped and tossed its head. Cassian's pulse kicked once hard in his ears. The storm was still heavy, flinging snow sideways across the ridge, but he knew what he heard. The mountains lied about many things, but not that. Another cry broke through the storm, higher this time, sharper. Not an animal, not the wind. A baby. Cassian swung down from the saddle. His boots sank deep into the drift snow, swallowing his ankles with every step. The air tasted like cold metal. Visibility was no more than a few yards, but the sound, thin and desperate, pulled him forward. "Easy, boy," he murmured to the horse. His breath came out in white bursts. His coat, thick and lined with wool, did little against the bite of the wind. He pushed past a cluster of piñon pines, each one bent under the weight of the storm. His eyes narrowed. There, just ahead, a sagging fence post, half rotted, half buried in snow. And something else. Something slumped at its base. A shape. Cassian's chest tightened. He moved faster. Not a shape. A woman. She was tied upright against the post with barbed wire that cut so deep into her wrists he could see dark streaks where blood had frozen. Her hair was crusted with snow lashes, white lips cracked blue. Her dress, thin cotton, soaked through, clung to her like ice. And at her feet were 3 small bundles, babies, newborns by the look of them, barely wrapped in torn cloth faces, pale as the snow, except where cold had burned them violet. One of them cried again, weak, strangled a voice near the edge of fading. Cassian's heartbeat turned hard and steady. Everything inside him, every instinct inherited from his mother's people, every oath he stopped making after losing his wife rose like a tide. He dropped to his knees beside the woman. "Hey," he said softly. "Stay with me." Her eyes fluttered open. Brown, wide, terrified. She tried to speak, but only a rasp came out. He leaned closer. "Don't let them take my daughters," she whispered. Her voice was a ghost of a sound, but the plea in it was sharp enough to cut bone. Cassian worked quickly. He slipped off his gloves and checked each baby. Shallow breaths, skin like snow melt, weak but alive. He turned back to the woman. Her hands trembled where the wire held them. "Don't talk," he said. "Save your strength." Snow stung his face as he drew his knife. The barbed wire was rusted, biting deep into her skin. He cut slowly, carefully, knowing any quick jerk could tear her further. When the wire snapped free, she sagged forward. He caught her before she fell. Her body was limp, far too cold, far too still. "Hold on," Cassian muttered, lifting her against his chest. "You hear me? Hold on." He tucked the smallest baby inside his coat close to his ribs. The other 2 he wrapped inside a thick wool blanket pulled from his saddle. His horse stamped nervously, unsettled by the storm, or maybe by the scent of near death in the air. Cassian mounted with the woman in front of him, the blanket of babies wedged securely between them. She weighed almost nothing. The babies even less. The wind slammed against them like fists. The storm swallowed sound. But Cassian leaned forward, shielding all 4 lives with his body, the way he once shielded his younger cousins during raids. The memory burned in his mind, The last time he'd held someone this fragile had been his wife dying from fever, slipping through his arms before he could find help. Not again. Not tonight. He pressed his face into the woman's hair, felt ice crack under his cheek, and whispered the words that rose from someplace deep and old. They don't die here. Not while I'm breathing. The ride back to the ranch was slow, brutal. Snow piled on his hat brim. Cold needled through his coat. The woman drifted in and out of consciousness, her head tipping against his chest, her breath a faint flutter on his shirt. 1/2 mile. That was all. 1/2 mile through hell. When the cabin came into view, a dark shape against the swirling white, Cassian felt his shoulders loosen for the first time. He kicked the door open with his boot, carried the woman inside, then returned for the babies. The fire had long gone out, the hearth cold. His hands shook with urgency, not fear, as he dropped kindling, lit a match, and coaxed flames to life. Warmth spread slowly, pushing the cold back into the corners of the room. He laid the woman on a bed of blankets near the hearth. Her lips were nearly white, her fingers stiff. Cassian grabbed a pot, filled it with goat's milk from a jug, set it by the flame. Then he moved back to the babies. One whimpered a tiny sound, but that was enough. He fed each child with a carved pine spoon. They swallowed weakly at first, then with more insistence. Their color didn't come back yet, but their breathing steadied. When he was sure they were safe for the moment, he knelt beside the woman. He brushed ice from her hair, checked her pulse. Faint but present. "You're alive," he said quietly. "That's enough for now." Outside, the storm continued its furious sweep across the mountains. Inside, the fire cracked, throwing gold light across the wooden walls. The babies shifted in their blankets, soft sighs barely audible over the wind. Cassian sat back on his heels, studying the woman who had been left to die on his land. He didn't know her story, didn't know who tied her out there or why. But he would. And whoever had done it would come looking. His jaw tightened. He wasn't giving her back. Not to any man. Not to any devil. Not after the way she fought to stay alive. He added more wood to the fire, then settled beside the hearth to keep watch, every sense alert. Dawn would come soon. And with it, questions. The morning light crept into the cabin like a nervous visitor, slipping between the cracks in the shutters, brushing across the floorboards, and settling at last on her face. Luz Maria. Cassian Red Elk had spent the last 2 hours just watching her breathe. She lay still, bundled in every blanket he owned. Her skin was pale as bone, her lips dry and cracked, but the rise and fall of her chest, slow, shallow, meant the fight wasn't over. Not yet. Across the room near the hearth, the 3 babies stirred together in the basket he'd lined with rabbit pelts. The tiniest one, the one he'd tucked inside his coat the night before, let out a thin, gasping cry. It wasn't strong, but it was sound. It was will. Cassian moved without thinking. He poured a small amount of goat's milk into a tin pot and held it near the fire until it warmed. He stirred it gently, testing it with his wrist, then grabbed the feeding spoon he'd carved years ago and never thought he'd use. The baby took the milk slowly, mouth-weak hands curled like dying petals. Then she took more. That was enough. Cassian shifted to the next, then the next, feeding them one at a time, murmuring nothing words as he worked. His voice, gravel-soft and low, filled the space like smoke. "You little ones weren't made to die in the snow," he said. "Not today." When he finished, he pulled another blanket over the basket and returned to where Luz Maria lay. Her face hadn't moved. Her breathing was still shallow, but constant. "You're stronger than you look," he muttered to the room. A rasp cut through the silence. "So am I." He turned sharply. Her eyes were open barely, but they were and staring straight at him. The brown in them was muddied bloodshot, but fierce. Her voice was no louder than a breath, but there was steel in it. Cassian moved closer, hands lifted slow. "You're safe here," he said. "No one's gonna hurt you." Her gaze drifted to the basket. "My daughters," she whispered, panic flaring behind her cracked voice. "They're alive," he said. "Tired. Cold. But alive." She blinked rapidly like she was fighting to stay conscious. "You kept them breathing," Cassian added. "That counts for something." He brought a cup of warm water to her lips. She tried to lift her head, failed. He supported her neck with one hand, let her drink slowly. A few sips in, she winced. "What's your name?" he asked. "Luz Maria Aguirre." Cassian sat back on his heels. Aguirre. The name sat sour in his mouth. He'd heard of Santos Aguirre. Everyone in the Sacramento range had. A land baron, smuggler, wife-beater if you listened to the right people. "Your husband left you out there?" he asked carefully. She didn't answer at first. Then slowly she nodded. "He said if the snow didn't kill me, maybe I deserved to live." Her voice was fragile, but the words landed like stones. Cassian didn't speak. He reached for a folded cloth, soaked it in warm water, and gently pressed it to the deep red rings around her wrists where the barbed wire had cut through. She winced again, but said nothing. "You're lucky the wolves didn't find you first," he murmured. "Maybe I'm not the lucky one," she said bitterly. Cassian didn't argue. Instead, he crossed the room and knelt in front of a cedar chest. From it, he took out 3 narrow pieces of wood, each about the length of a hand, each blank, smooth, ready. "Do they have names?" he asked. She blinked again, more slowly this time, her voice trembling. "The smallest one is Sol. The middle is Pilar. The firstborn, Isabella." Cassian sat cross-legged near the fire and pulled a carving knife from his belt. He braced one of the plaques on his knee and began to work. One letter at a time. Luz watched him in silence. The hiss of the fire, the scrape of steel on wood. Each stroke echoed in the quiet. She could barely sit up, but she stared as though memorizing the moment. She finally spoke. "Why are you doing this?" He didn't look up. "If they deserve names," he said, voice low, "they deserve a future." She bit her lip, and for a moment her eyes flooded. But she blinked fast, pushing the tears back. It wasn't the time for tears. Not yet. When Cassian finished, he tied rawhide string through each plaque and hung them over the baby's basket. Sol, Pilar, Isabella. 3 names now claimed by the world. 3 lives saved by inches. The fire crackled behind him. Luz had turned her face to the side, away from him, but he saw her shoulders shaking just slightly beneath the blankets. She was crying now, quietly, without sound. Not from weakness, but because for the first time in days she could. Cassian left her be. He moved to the window, wiped away the frost, and stared into the gray light outside. Snow still covered the yard, but the sky was clearing. He could see tree lines again, peaks. He could also see tracks, not old ones either. Fresh. A horse had passed within 100 yards during the night, too far to be heard over the wind, but close enough to mark its path. Someone had been looking. Someone would be back. He walked to the door, checked the latch, then pulled on his coat and stepped outside. The wind had calmed. The silence was clean now, undisturbed. But Cassian didn't trust silence. It had fooled him before. He moved to the barn, fed the horse, checked the perimeter, then returned. He paused on the porch, staring out toward the trail that led down into the valley. And there, at the edge of the woods, he saw the faint outline of a rider approaching through the trees. One man. Slow gait. Familiar posture. Cassian narrowed his eyes. Elias McGraw. A name from the past. A friend once. Maybe still. Cassian opened the door, stepped back inside, and looked toward Luce, now asleep again. He walked to the hearth, sat down, and began sharpening his knife. Quiet. Steady. The children slept. The woman healed. And the past came riding up the mountain. The man on horseback crested the ridge just as the sky broke open with light. His silhouette cut clean through the mist, a long coat flaring behind him, rifle slung easy across his back. Cassian Red Elk stood on the porch of his cabin, arms crossed, waiting. He didn't need to see the face to know who it was. Elias McGraw. Cassian stayed silent as the horse came to a slow, careful stop just outside the fence. Elias dismounted like he'd done it 1,000 times, with a quiet grunt and a heavy drop of boots onto snow-melted earth. The man looked like he'd been on the trail for days. His coat was crusted with ice and pine needles, and his face bore 3 days' worth of stubble and a pair of eyes that looked older than the rest of him. "I'll be damned," Elias said, pulling off his gloves as he approached. "You still breathing up here or just haunting the place?" Cassian didn't crack a smile. "Get inside." Elias raised an eyebrow but obeyed. He stomped his boots clean on the step and stepped into the cabin's warmth. Inside, the air was thick with heat and smoke, the scent of boiled milk and pine bark clinging to the walls. The fire burned strong. Luz Maria lay asleep on the bedroll closest to it, wrapped in blankets, face pale but steady with sleep. In the corner, the 3 babies, Sol, Pilar, Isabella, slept in their fur-lined basket. Elias stopped just inside the doorway. "Well," he muttered, "that explains it." Cassian shut the door behind him. The latch clicked home like the lock on a vault. "She yours?" Cassian didn't answer. Elias raised his hands in mock surrender. "Didn't think so. Just surprised is all. You're not the kind of man to pick up strays." "She ain't a stray," Cassian said quietly. "She's a survivor." Elias turned toward the fire, hands outstretched. "Whole damn territory's talking about her. Her and those babies. Word is Santos Aguirre put out a bounty. 500 pesos for the woman, 300 for the girls." Cassian didn't move. "He says she ran," Elias nodded. "Claims she's hysterical. Says she ran off into the snow with his daughters and disappeared. He wants them brought back safe." Got half the bounty men between Lincoln and Fort Sumner sniffing the ridges like wolves. Cassian's jaw clenched. He left her tied to a post to die. Elias turned slowly. "You saw it. I cut her down myself." The silence stretched long after that. The fire popped in the hearth, and one of the babies whimpered softly in her sleep. Elias's face changed. Whatever sarcasm or trail-worn detachment he'd walked in with slipped away. "I heard stories," he said finally, "but I didn't want to believe them." Cassian moved to the hearth, picked up a fresh log, and set it in the flames. "You came up here for a reason." Elias pulled something from his coat, a paper weather-stained and hand-drawn. He dropped it on the table. Cassian unfolded it and stared down at the bounty notice. Luz's name was misspelled, but her face hastily sketched was unmistakable. The babies were listed as infants, gender unknown. He read it once, then again. When he set it down, he didn't say a word. "I figured she might be up here," Elias said. Figured if she was, she didn't come on her own. She didn't, Cassian said. She tell you anything? Not yet. She's been too weak. But I don't need her story to know what he is. Elias nodded grimly. You remember what happened to my sister? Cassian looked up sharply. 2 winters back, Elias continued. Married a man out near Carazozo. Real smooth. Real God-fearin'. Beat her within a breath of death before spring. Cassian's voice was steady. She get out barely. She's back in Las Cruces now running a dress shop. Hides when the wind changes. Elias stepped toward the basket of babies crouching down to look at the girls. Sol's tiny fingers were curled around a corner of blanket. Isabella's lip twitched like she was dreaming. Pilar snored a soft, breathy whimper. You fed 'em, Cassian nodded. They yours? Elias asked again. No, but you care. Cassian's eyes narrowed. They were left on my land. That's enough. Elias stood slowly. You saved me once, he said, changing the subject. Back in Bitter Creek. You remember? Cassian didn't reply. I do, Elias said, voice quieter now. Arrow in my side, my leg busted. I told you to leave me. You didn't. I figured you might be useful someday, Cassian muttered. Elias smiled. Guess I owe you then. Cassian looked him square in the eyes. I'm not asking. I'm offering, Elias said. You saved me once. Now I return the debt. The line hung in the air like a hammer. Cassian exhaled through his nose. You sure? Elias looked around the room at the fire, at Luce, at the girls. Then he nodded. I'll ride back down to Lincoln. Keep my ear to the ground. Word is Santos hired at least 2 bounty riders already. They're heading up the East Trail. If you stay here, they'll find you. Let 'em, Cassian said. Let 'em try. Elias grabbed his gloves. Be smart. Fortify the cabin. Check your traps. Make friends with that rifle again. Cassian followed him to the door. Elias paused, hand on the latch. This ain't just about protecting her. You know that, right? Cassian said nothing. Elias's gaze was sharp. This is about you. You lost someone once, but you didn't die with her. That's what this is. You still breathing. The latch clicked open, and Elias stepped back out into the cold. He mounted his horse and looked back only once. You know where to find me, he called. Use it. Then he rode off. Cassian stood in the doorway long after the sound of hooves faded. He turned back into the cabin, locked the door, and returned to the hearth. Luce was awake. She'd heard every word. She didn't speak. Just looked at him, her eyes wide, tired, full of questions she was too afraid to ask. Cassian nodded once. You're not going back, he said quietly. I'll see to that. She swallowed hard. He'll send more. He won't stop. I won't either. Then he sat down beside the fire, pulled out his whetstone, and began sharpening his blade again. Outside, the snow fell slower, but the sky had darkened, and the mountain held its breath. The fire had burned low, casting long flickering shadows that climbed the walls like ghosts. Outside, the wind had died down, but the cabin still creaked like it remembered the storm. Cassian sat at the table, blade in hand, running it slow and steady across the whetstone. Each pass made a soft whisper, steel against stone, quiet, deliberate. Luz Maria hadn't said a word since Elias left, but he knew she wasn't asleep. She lay curled near the hearth, the babies bundled close. Her eyes were half closed, but her breathing betrayed her restlessness. Cassian didn't push. He knew some stories had to rip themselves out on their own. It came finally, as he stood to toss another log into the fire. "I was 17, she said softly. He froze mid-motion, then lowered the log gently into the flames. He didn't turn around, just listened. "My father owed money to a man in Santa Fe. Too much. Couldn't pay. So he sold me instead." Her voice was dry, cracking around the edges. The fire popped, but it didn't interrupt her. "He told me I was lucky." Santos Aguirre was 34, wealthy, respected, said I'd never have to work another day. Cassian lowered himself into the chair across from her elbows, resting on his knees, still silent. The house was big, cold but full of polished things, crystal glasses, silk curtains, imported rugs, and silence. So much silence. Santos didn't speak unless he was angry. He didn't touch me unless he wanted something. Never once looked me in the eye. She rubbed her wrist absently over the fading bruises. Her gaze didn't meet his. "I gave him Isabella first. He was disappointed. Said daughters were mouths, not heirs. Pilar came next, and he stopped speaking to me altogether. After Saul, he called a midwife I barely knew and told her I'd cursed his name." Cassian's jaw twitched. He told his brothers I was like a mule with a broken leg. Useless. That night they tied me up, carried me out like livestock, left me at the old post down the cattle trail, said if the snow didn't kill me, it meant I was meant to live. She paused, voice trembling now. He called it justice. Cassian stood slowly and crossed to the cabinet. He poured a small cup of water, handed it to her without a word. She drank, then set it beside her. Her next words came like a blade being pulled out of a wound. He told them the girls weren't worth feeding, said he'd sell them or worse. That's when I knew I couldn't wait anymore. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Her lips were trembling, but no tears came. Not anymore. She'd cried all she could in the snow. "I thought I'd make it to the mission near the foothills, but I didn't even get past the ridge." Cassian crouched beside her now, steady and grounded like the roots of an old tree. "You did," he said. "You made it." She looked at him, something breaking loose behind her tired eyes. "I thought I'd die out there." "You almost did." And then he looked toward the basket. One of the babies whimpered in her sleep, then quieted again. "They're still here." She nodded slowly. "I never wanted much," she whispered. "Just somewhere safe. Just somewhere to raise them without looking over my shoulder." Cassian's voice came low but certain. "Then that's what you'll have." She stared at him like she wanted to believe it, but didn't know how. "I don't have money," she said. "Or family. Or—" "You've got them," he cut in. "And you've got me." Her throat worked as she swallowed. Why she asked, and it wasn't a challenge. It was the quiet wonder of someone who'd never been given anything without strings. Cassian looked her square in the eyes. "Because I've seen what men like him become when no one stops them. And because no woman should be left to die with her babies in her arms." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she whispered, "If the snow didn't kill me, it means I was meant to live." He nodded once. Damn right. The silence after that was different. Warmer. Still heavy, but not cold. Cassian stood and returned to the hearth. The flames danced higher now. He added a few logs, adjusted the iron pot hanging above. "Got some dried venison in the cellar," he said, like they hadn't just laid bare the darkest corners of her life. "I'll make a stew." She nodded, and when he turned back to look at her, she was leaning into the light, her arms curled protectively around the babies. Later that evening, she rose with his help and walked slow and shaky to the basin to wash her face. She didn't speak, just stared at her reflection in the water, fingers hovering over the bruises on her jaw, the dried blood in her hair. He left her to it. Outside, the air had thickened with a low fog, and somewhere in the trees, a branch cracked under weight that didn't belong to wind. Cassian stepped onto the porch, boots crunching on frozen ground. He scanned the dark tree line. Nothing but stillness. But stillness was often the first lie. He came back inside, bolted the door, and slid his rifle from the hooks above the mantel. Luce watched him, but didn't speak. "I'll check the back traps tomorrow," he said. "No one comes up here unless they mean to." "You think he'll come?" she asked. "He will. Or someone he paid." She looked down at the floor. "I don't want you hurt because of me." Cassian's voice was firm. "It's not about you. It's about what's right." She nodded, but her eyes drifted back to the babies. "Then teach me," she said. He turned. "What if he finds us? I don't want to be helpless again. Teach me. To fight. To shoot. To protect them." He studied her, this woman who'd been trussed like cattle and left for dead, and saw something else now. Not just survival. Fire. "All right," he said. "We start in the morning." A smile barely touched her lips, small and sad and brave. That night, Cassian sat at the table cleaning his rifle while Luce fed the babies by firelight. She hummed softly, nothing with words, just a tune remembered from somewhere warm, somewhere lost. The warmth in the cabin grew steady. The darkness outside deepened. And in the forest, 3 shadows rode slowly through the fog, dismounting near the first tree line. They didn't speak, but they were close. By dawn, Cassian was already outside, boots sunk in frost-hardened dirt, scanning the tree line with quiet precision. Fog drifted low through the ridges, thick enough to hide movement, thin enough to make you paranoid. His breath showed white in the cold air, but he barely noticed. He'd seen the prints near the north slope just after sunrise, hoof marks 4 sets, and they weren't his. Someone had made camp just below the ridge. Cassian hadn't approached. Not yet. Not until he knew what kind of trouble was coming. Back in the cabin, Luce was awake. She moved quieter now, more deliberately keeping the girls close. Her bruises were fading, but her posture said she was still bracing for a hit. She stirred a pot of pine root broth over the fire, casting glances toward the shuttered windows every few minutes. "Something's wrong, isn't it?" she asked when Cassian stepped inside. He nodded, pulling off his coat and shaking out the cold. 4 riders. Came up from the East Trail last night. Left tracks. Smelled smoke down by the creek. "Bounty hunters?" she asked, already knowing the answer. Maybe. Maybe worse. She didn't ask if he was scared. Cassian cleaned his rifle in silence. Luce fed the girls in silence. When the fire popped, they both turned their heads at the same time. The quiet had become a second language. By mid-morning, the sun cut through the fog and the wind picked up. Cassian stepped out again this time, walking straight to the bluff, overlooking the narrow trail leading in from the east. He crouched low behind a fallen pine and waited. They showed themselves just before noon. 4 riders, just like he expected. They weren't in a rush. In fact, they looked like they owned the damn mountain. Wide-brimmed hats, long dusters, boots crusted with dried red clay from lower down. Guns slung easy, loose hands on reins. Not amateurs, not green. One of them, the leader by the way the others hung back, had a scar that ran from the corner of his mouth to his jawline. He rode a black gelding and chewed a toothpick like it was personal. Cassian stepped into the open. He didn't bring his rifle, didn't bring a blade, just himself. The horses stopped short. Scarface looked down from his saddle. "Well, look at that," he said. "Didn't think we'd get hospitality up this high." "You lost Cassian?" asked, voice low, unreadable. The man smirked. "No, but thanks for the offer. Name's Callow. We're bounty men. You're not wanted here." Callow leaned on the saddle horn. "We're just tracking a fugitive. Heard she was spotted around these parts." Cassian's jaw flexed, but he said nothing. Callow kept smiling. "You know how it is. Young mother. Stole a man's children. Lost her damn mind. Ran into the woods like a wolf. Real tragedy." Cassian didn't blink. "She's not yours to take." "That's so." Callow's voice dropped an octave. "You hiding her friend?" Cassian didn't answer. "'Cause if you are, that puts you on the wrong side of the law." Cassian's gaze didn't move. "Not every man with a gun is here to save you." Callow tilted his head, smile gone. "Is that supposed to scare me?" "No," Cassian said. "It's supposed to remind you where you are." One of the other riders shifted in his saddle. Another checked the chamber of his revolver, subtle but visible. Callow spat into the snow. "You know who she belongs to, don't you?" he asked. "That name means something. Aguirre's got judges, marshals, even the bishop on payroll." Cassian said nothing. Callow chuckled. "And here you are playing hero. You think this ends with you and her raising those bastards in the mountains?" Cassian's voice came flat, hard. "You say one more word about those children, and I promise you'll leave here with fewer teeth." The moment stretched. The wind shifted. The silence cracked. Callow stared at him for a long beat, then pulled on the reins and turned his horse away. "Let's go," he barked to the others. "Not worth the bullet. Not today." The riders turned one by one and started down the slope. Cassian didn't move until the sound of hooves faded into the trees. He walked back, slow, steady, jaw tight, blood still hot under the calm. Luce was waiting on the porch when he arrived, rifle across her knees. "They're bounty men," he confirmed. "Did they see the girls? No. But they know she's here. They'll come back." Luce nodded, no fear in her face, just grim understanding. That night the cabin felt smaller, tighter, like the walls were listening. Cassian repaired the window latch, reinforced the door, piled more wood beside the hearth. Luce stitched rips in the girls' blankets and tucked dried food into a cloth bag under the table. They didn't talk much, until after dark. She sat beside him at the fire, the girls asleep, and asked, why did they leave? "Because they're smart," he said. "Smart men retreat when they're unsure. Will they come back with more? Maybe. Or with worse." She nodded. "Then we make this place ready." Cassian looked over at her. She wasn't shaking anymore, wasn't curling into herself like she had when she first arrived. "They won't get past me," he said. She looked into his eyes. "I know, but I won't let you stand alone." There was something about the way she said it, no drama, no grand gesture, just fact. He offered her the whetstone and her blade. She took it and started sharpening. Outside, the wind carried the scent of pine and melted snow. The forest had gone quiet again. But silence, Cassian knew, was always a warning. By morning, he'd patrol the north path. Luce would stay in the cabin with the rifle. The girls would be moved to the root cellar if need be. Every exit mapped. Every escape planned. Because this wasn't a rescue anymore. It was a siege. By first light, the frost was back. It glazed the pines, the porch railing. Even the ridge trail Cassian walked every morning now like clockwork. He scanned the forest through narrowed eyes, boots crunching the frozen ground beneath him. Every broken branch or misplaced print kept him sharp. Luce stood in the doorway behind him, arms crossed against the cold. She'd slept little, same as him. Neither had spoken much since the bounty riders left. There wasn't much to say. They both knew silence didn't mean safety. After checking the outer traps, Cassian came back in to find Luce already holding the Colt. It was unloaded as he'd instructed. Her fingers fumbled slightly with the cylinder, trying to remember the steps. "Stop breathing like you're trying not to wake a ghost," he said, closing the door behind him. She glanced up. "I don't want to shoot myself by accident." "That's why we practice," he replied, setting down his rifle. "You're not going to get it perfect. Not yet. But you'll learn." Luce held the gun a little tighter. Her fingers were red from the cold. She looked at him, serious. "I'm not asking to be saved. I just want to be ready." Cassian nodded. "Then let's get started." He set up a line of empty cans on a fallen log, 50 yards out from the cabin. The snow had melted enough to clear patches of muddy earth beneath the pine branches. The air was still heavy with tension. Luce stood behind him, the gun in both hands, squinting down the sights. Cassian watched her shoulders. "First thing, don't lock your arms. You're not wrestling it. You're guiding it. Like reins." She adjusted. "Breathe steady. Don't hold it. Let it move through you." She inhaled slowly, exhaled slower. "Now squeeze. Don't pull. Just enough to surprise yourself." The shot cracked through the trees. A puff of snow exploded behind the cans. Wide right. Cassian didn't flinch. Again. She reset her stance. Shot again. This time closer. Cassian crossed his arms. Good. Again. By the 10th shot, her hand was shaking from the cold and the tension, but one of the cans finally toppled. She stared in disbelief. Her mouth opened, then closed. Cassian gave her a small nod. "That's yours." A smile flickered across her face. It was gone fast, but it had been there. They spent the next hour cycling drills, reloading, quick draws, knife work. Luce's hands were bruised by the end of it, and her knuckles had split in 2 places, but she didn't complain. That afternoon, she sat on the porch, cleaning the pistol like it was something sacred. Cassian stayed nearby, boiling root tea and listening for movement. It came around dusk. A twig snapped deliberate, not the wind. Cassian stood and drew his rifle in one breath. Luce followed, pistol already in hand. But the figure that emerged from the tree line wasn't a bounty man. It was a woman, wrapped in layers of rough wool and a shawl patterned with the colors of the Pueblo sky. Her eyes were sharp as needles, her skin brown and creased like leather left under sun. "Mama Chelo," Cassian muttered, lowering his rifle. Luce blinked, confused. "Who?" Cassian stepped forward quickly. "She's the one who raised me." The old woman walked up the path like she belonged there, like the mountain owed her something. She stopped just short of the porch and raised a hand in greeting. Her other held a staff carved with coyote shapes. Cassian met her with a quiet urgency. "Why are you here?" Her voice came like sand over stone. "Because he's coming." Luce stepped forward now, her face pale. Santos Mama Chelo looked her over with a gaze that saw too much and judged little. "He's 2 days behind me. Rode up from Las Cruces with 5 men. One of them carries a badge. All of them carry death. Cassian's jaw clenched. He put word out that the law's behind him, she continued. Told everyone he's come to retrieve what's his. Luce's hands went to her chest. My girls, they are not his. Mama Chelo cut in sharply. Not in blood, not in spirit. That man poisons everything he touches, but he moves fast, and he pays well. Cassian turned to Luce. We don't have time to wait. Mama Chelo nodded. You'll need the old traps, the ridge paths, the high perch above the pass. Cassian already had them marked in his head. We'll start tonight. I'll help, Mama Chelo said. I may be old, but I still remember how to snare a wolf. Luce looked between them, heart racing. What are you saying? Cassian faced her. We fight. Luce hesitated, and then she said it. If he walks through that clearing, I won't run. I'll face him. I'd rather die free than live afraid. The words dropped like iron into the room. Mama Chelo nodded with pride. Then the mountain will stand with you. That night, they worked by lantern light. Cassian and Mama Chelo checked the trap lines, repositioned stones on the east slope to roll loose with a kick. They dug false prints to confuse riders, moved the girl's sleeping basket to the cellar, and reinforced the hatch with iron nails and packed snow. Luce stayed in the cabin watching from the window with the pistol laid across her lap. At one point, she whispered to Isabella, the oldest barely 6 months old, Your mother's not running this time. When Cassian came back inside covered in dirt and pine needles, she looked up at him. What happens if we don't win? She asked. He poured hot water into a tin cup and handed it to her. Then we take as many of them with us as we can. She took the drink, but didn't flinch. Cassian sat by the hearth and began cleaning his rifle. Mama Chelo took a blanket near the fire and sharpened a bone-handled blade, humming something old under her breath. The air in the cabin was thick with smoke and something else resolve. This wasn't just about defense anymore. It was retribution. The morning came slow and strange. The kind of stillness that doesn't mean peace, it means something's coming. Cassian stood on the bluff, staring down the winding trail that led through the eastern ridge. The sky was the color of wet ash, and the wind had shifted again, carrying a scent he hadn't smelled in years, rose oil leather and gunpowder. He turned his head slightly. Luce was behind him, rifle strapped across her chest, eyes scanning the trees like she belonged to them now. Mama Chelo waited by the edge of the cabin, her shawl drawn tight, her staff planted in the frozen ground like a warning stake. They'd been up since before the sun, boiling tea, checking lines, loading ammo. No more practice, no more theory. The time had arrived. Cassian spoke without turning. He'll come slow, wants to be seen, wants us to know. Luce's voice was quiet. Because this isn't about justice. It's about control. He nodded. Always has been. Just then, the first figure appeared on the ridge trail. A rider tall in the saddle, dressed in black from boots to hat. A red scarf curled at his throat like dried blood. Behind him came 4 others, armed wide-shouldered with that same mercenary stillness. And at the center of it all, Santos Aguirre. He looked the same as Luce remembered, or maybe worse. Time had sharpened him. Hair slicked back, gloves too clean, smile like it had been carved into his face and never warmed. They stopped just beyond the clearing where the trail met the mouth of the homestead. Santos raised a hand in greeting, as if this were a polite social call. Cassian didn't wave back. Santos dismounted slowly, adjusting his coat. He walked forward a few paces, boots sinking slightly in the thawing ground. His voice, when he finally spoke, carried clear. Cassian Red Elk, he said, smiling like a man already celebrating a victory. I heard the stories. Never figured you for the sentimental type. Cassian stood still, expression flat. You're not welcome here. Santos chuckled, turning his hands upward. And yet here I am. I come in peace. Luce stepped beside Cassian now. Her rifle wasn't raised, but it wasn't idle either. Santos's eyes landed on her. He gave a mock bow. Mi flor, you look well. Luce's voice came cold and firm. You're not here for peace. You're here because you think no one will stop you. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face before the charm snapped back into place. He gestured toward his men. I'm here to collect what was taken from me. That includes my daughters. They're not yours, Luce said. They carry my name, he snapped. They carry my blood, she replied, but not your soul. Cassian shifted slightly, just enough to widen his stance. You come here with 5 men, thinking it makes you strong. Santos looked back at his guards. It makes me prepared. Cassian nodded. Good, because you're going to need every damn one of them. Santos stepped forward one more time. Let's be civil about this, Red Elk. You give me the woman and the children and I'll walk away. No blood, no fire, just clean hands. Mama Chelo's voice rang out, then sharp and clear from the porch. You don't have clean hands. You never have. Santos turned slowly. His eyes narrowed at the sight of her. You're still breathing, old witch, he said. I've outlived better men than you. He laughed. Then maybe you'll bury one more before sunset. Cassian stepped down the trail 2 paces, close enough now for everyone to feel the shift in the air. You made one mistake, he said. Santos raised a brow. Only one. Cassian's voice was steel. You came thinking this mountain belonged to you. He raised his hand slowly, then dropped it. A shot rang out. One of Santos's men dropped from his saddle, screaming, his shoulder torn open by a trap trigger wire strung between the trees. The horses reared. Chaos cracked through the clearing. Cassian dove left, rolling behind a boulder. Luce moved the opposite direction, rifle to her shoulder, breath steady. Mama Chelo ducked inside the cabin, slamming the door behind her. Gunfire tore the air. Santos yelled for his men to spread. 2 peeled off toward the west ridge, right where Cassian had placed the loose stone traps. Seconds later, rocks cascaded down, crushing branches and knocking one man clean off his horse. He didn't get up. The 3rd tried flanking toward the back of the cabin, only to be met with Luce's first clean shot. The man screamed, spun, and dropped into the underbrush. Santos stood his ground, firing once toward Cassian, then again toward the porch. Neither shot found its mark. Cassian moved fast, faster than any man that size should have. He closed the gap rifle up, drawing a bead on Santos's leg. He fired once. The shot hit. Santos went down hard leg, twisting beneath him, blood soaking through his fine wool trousers. But still the man laughed. You think this is the end? He growled, crawling backward. You think killing me changes anything? Luce approached, now stepping over the body of one of his guards, her rifle aimed squarely at Santos's chest. I think it changes everything, she said. He looked up at her, breathing hard, sweat slicking his brow. You're not a killer, Luce. She paused. No, she said, but I don't have to be. Cassian stood beside her, lowering his rifle. You'll stand trial, he said. Santos spat. Trial. You think the law will come this far for a woman and her bastard kids? Mama Chelo stepped out of the cabin, staff in hand. They will, because we'll bring them. Santos glared. You'll never make it off this mountain. Cassian crouched beside him. His voice was quiet. final. Neither will you if you try anything else. They bound Santos's hands and feet with leather cord. Mama Chelo packed the wound. Luce stood watch with the rifle unwavering. By sundown, 2 of the men were dead. 1 was missing in the woods. The other bled out behind the boulder. Santos groaned in pain beside the fire, his arrogance seeping out with every drop of blood. Inside, the girls slept peacefully. Outside, the mountain exhaled for the first time in days. The morning after the standoff, the mountain was unnervingly quiet. The kind of quiet that settles after a storm, not peace, but the stunned breath between what was and what might still come. Fog hung low across the trees. Snowmelt trickled in slow veins down the slopes. Birds didn't sing. Inside the cabin, Santos Aguirre lay bound to a chair, his wound dressed, but angry, his pride bleeding more than his leg. Luce hadn't spoken to him since the shot. She kept the girls upstairs now, far from his voice, far from the danger his name still carried. Cassian watched him without blinking. "He's not gonna stop," Luce had said just an hour earlier, voice trembling with conviction. "Even if the law comes, he'll twist it. He'll buy the judge, he always has." Cassian hadn't argued, but he also hadn't surrendered to that idea. Not yet. Now he sat across from Santos, cleaning his revolver while the bastard glared like a caged panther. "You're not as clever as you think," Santos said finally. Cassian didn't look up. "You should have killed me yesterday. Now you'll hang for this. Harboring a fugitive. Interfering with an officer of the law." "Assault with intent," Cassian finally spoke. "You brought 5 men up here to take a woman and 3 babies by force. You think a marshal won't ask questions?" Santos sneered. "I already answered him. The moment I paid for the badge, that'll come knocking." Cassian slid the chamber shut with a snap. "We'll see." The door creaked open then. Snowflakes drifted in on the wind, and Elias McGraw stepped inside like he hadn't just ridden through 2 days of frozen hell. He stomped his boots, unwrapped his scarf, and looked at Santos with quiet disgust. "Well," Elias said, "he's uglier than I remember." Luce entered behind him, rifle in her hands, eyes sharp. "What did you find?" Elias shook off the cold and pulled a folded paper from inside his coat. "Marshall's 2 days out. Name's Josiah Maddox. Straight out of Mesilla. He don't owe Santos a thing. Word is he already knows there's something crooked going on." Cassian raised an eyebrow. "He coming alone?" "No," Elias said. "Bringing 2 deputies. Quiet types. Ex-Union scouts. They've got orders to take statements and bring suspects back alive." Santos chuckled darkly. "You're all fools. You think this'll hold in court? A woman's word against mine, a whore no less." Luce didn't flinch. She stepped forward, leveled her gaze at him. "You're right," she said. "My word won't be enough." Santos smirked. "But the bruises will," she added. "The scars. The ledger your brother kept, the one where he sold women across county lines under your name. Mama Chelo's testimony. The girl's blood type, which doesn't match yours." He blinked, faltered. "Just a second." But it was enough. Cassian stood. "We ride out tomorrow. Meet the marshal halfway down the ridge." "You're coming with us!" Santos leaned forward, eyes blazing. "You won't make it 10 miles. "We'll make it 10 more than you want us to," Cassian replied. That night the cabin buzzed with quiet movement. Supplies packed, weapons checked. Luce packed the girls' things while Mama Chelo prepared bundles of herbs and salves. Elias cleaned the saddles and oiled the bridles. Cassian stood outside watching the tree line. Luce joined him, arms wrapped around herself against the cold. You trust this marshal? She asked. No, Cassian said. But I trust Elias, and I trust you. She looked up at him. I don't know if I can sit in a courtroom and tell strangers what he did to me. You're not doing it for them. Then who? For the girls, he said. For every woman who was tied to a post and told her pain didn't matter. She didn't speak for a long time. Then, even if they believe me, it doesn't erase what happened. No, Cassian said, but it makes damn sure it doesn't happen again. She nodded, slowly, like someone shifting the weight of her past into something she could carry forward. The next morning they loaded the horses. Santos was tied to the back of Cassian's gelding, his leg wrapped tight but still seeping. He cursed the whole way, but no one answered him. Luce rode behind Elias, the girls bundled close, wrapped against the cold, and tucked beneath her shawl. Mama Chelo took the rear eyes, never straying far from the trees. They rode in silence for hours. The mountain seemed to watch them. The wind rose, then stilled. At one point, a hawk soared overhead, circling once before disappearing into the clouds. Around midday, they crested the first ridge and saw the figures waiting near the river crossing. 3 horses, 1 flag, no guns drawn. Marshal Maddox was tall, lean, clean-shaven, looked more preacher than lawman. But his eyes told another story, gray, unreadable, like someone who'd buried too many truths to keep track. He raised a hand in greeting. Cassian Red Elk. Cassian nodded, dismounted, and yanked Santos from his horse like a sack of bad memory. This is your man, Cassian said. Name's Santos Aguirre. He came with 5 armed men to abduct a woman and 3 children under false claims. 2 are buried back there. 2 more are missing. He resisted, and he's wounded. The marshal looked to Luce. Ma'am, she stepped forward, heart-hammering. He gave her space, but his gaze was steady. You Luz Maria Delgado I am. You willing to give testimony under oath? Her throat tightened, but she said the words anyway. Yes. Then let's get you off this mountain, he said. One of the deputies took hold of Santos's reins. He spat on the ground, silent now. Luce turned back to the trail as the group began to move again. Cassian stayed behind for a moment. The marshal looked back. You not coming, I will, Cassian said. But first I'm gonna ride up to the bluff. Say goodbye. To what the marshal asked. Cassian looked to the trees. To who I used to be. The marshal nodded once. We'll wait. The courthouse in Las Cruces stood tall and sun-beaten, its sandstone face worn by decades of desert wind and human conflict. Luce had seen it once before in another life, riding past in a wagon with Santos, his hand heavy on her knee, his voice full of promises that would turn into threats. But this time was different. This time she was walking in on her own terms. She held her head high as she stepped through the arched doors, flanked by Cassian, Elias, and Mama Chelo. The girls had been taken to a safe house near the chapel, watched over by kind-eyed sisters, who said nothing but moved with purpose. Luce kissed them each before leaving, her hands trembling as she closed the door. They were her roots, her reason, and today she would speak for them. Inside the courthouse buzzed with quiet noise. Lawyers shuffled papers. Townsfolk whispered from the pew-like benches. The air smelled of ink, sweat, and dust old justice. Santos Aguirre was already seated at the front table, bound at the wrists, his leg tightly wrapped in bandages. He wore a navy coat and a scarlet cravat, as if his elegance could rewrite his sins. His eyes found Luce immediately and narrowed. Not with fear, not even anger, but disbelief, as if her presence alone broke some law of his universe. She didn't look away. Judge Merriweather sat at the bench, a heavy man, with a weathered face and an unblinking stare. A man used to listening through lies. Cassian had said he was fair, but not forgiving. Marshal Maddox stood beside him. "Your Honor, the prosecution is ready to begin." The judge nodded. "Bring forth Miss Luz Maria Delgado." Her name rang out like the snap of a flag in a storm. She stood slowly, walked forward. Every step a stone she had to place beneath her own feet to keep from falling. She took her place at the witness stand. The clerk swore her in. Her voice was steady. "I do." The judge leaned forward. "Miss Delgado, this court recognizes you as the primary witness in the matter of Mr. Aguirre's charges. You may begin your account." She inhaled once deeply and spoke. "I was 17 when I was first promised to him," she began, her accent soft but clear. "My family owed a debt. Santos paid it. That was the beginning." She told them everything. From the wedding night to the first bruise. From the second pregnancy to the third, all girls. Unwanted by him. Each birth followed by cold silence or angry shouts. She described the isolation, the way her words had been ignored. Her body turned into property. Her daughters treated like burdens. She spoke without breaking. No embellishments. No tears. Just facts. Cold. Clean. Honest. Then came the day he tied her to the fence post. Gasps escaped the gallery. She described the cold, the snow, the pain, the sounds of her babies crying nearby, their breath nearly frozen. "And I thought," she said quietly, "if I die here, no one will know. No one will remember. My girls will be buried nameless in this mountain, and he'll just go on." She looked at Santos then. Direct. Measured. But I didn't die. I crawled. I bled. And I was found by a man who didn't ask for anything, didn't own anything, just helped. She recounted how Cassian had carried her, fed her, stood between her and death more than once. She spoke of Elias and Mamacello, of firewood and silence, of learning to shoot, of learning to trust. And finally she spoke of the day Santos came to take them back. He called it justice. He brought men with guns. He thought no one would stop him. But this time I stood up. I didn't hide. I didn't plead. I faced him. Santos barked a laugh. "She's a liar." The judge slammed the gavel. "One more outburst and you'll be gagged." Luz didn't flinch. "I am not what he says I am," she said calmly, "and I never was. I'm not broken, just beginning." Those words silenced the room. Even Santos didn't interrupt again. The court heard from Elias, who confirmed the injuries he'd seen when he found Luz. From Mamacello, who produced the ledger, its pages yellowed but damning. The marshal testified to the remains of the men, the traps, the defensive nature of the mountain standoff. A deputy even presented the birth records, showing that the girls had no blood match with Santos. The evidence painted a clear picture. Santos's lawyer tried to argue delusion, that Luz was unstable, that Cassian manipulated her, that Santos only ever tried to recover his family. But every time he opened his mouth, it only reminded the jury what abuse dressed in nice clothes sounded like. By late afternoon, the jury returned. They didn't need more than 2 hours. The judge's voice carried as he read the verdict. "We find that Santos Aguirre shall be held for criminal trial on charges of attempted murder, unlawful restraint, conspiracy to abduct minors, and sustained domestic abuse. Bail denied. Trial to commence next month." Cassian exhaled beside Luz but didn't cheer. None of them did. It wasn't over. But it was a beginning. As Santos was escorted out, he didn't yell, didn't resist. He just stared at Luce, his expression unreadable. For the first time in his life, he was no longer the loudest voice in the room. After the gavel fell and the crowd cleared, Luce stepped outside into the fading sunlight. The sky had turned a soft rose color with streaks of orange burning through the clouds. The courthouse behind her felt like a gate she'd just passed through and locked behind her. Cassian came up beside her. "You did what you came here to do." She nodded. "And now I know I can do more." That night back at the safe house, Luce sat with Mama Chelo by the fire while Cassian tucked in the girls. A knock came at the door. A woman stood outside, older, gray-haired, in a pale shawl. She introduced herself as the director of a small shelter outside Santa Fe. "We heard what you said in court," she explained. "What you survived. We're trying to help other women like you. Would you speak at our gathering next month?" Luce hesitated. "I'm not a speaker." The woman smiled. "You're exactly the kind of speaker they need." Later, alone on the porch, Cassian asked her, "What are you thinking?" She stared at the stars. "I think I'm tired of running," she said. "And I think it's time I started building something." He nodded. "We'll build it together." She didn't say thank you. Didn't need to. She was done surviving. Now she would begin to live. The hall outside Santa Fe was small, built from adobe and weathered pine, but packed with people, women, mostly a few old-timers, some younger men standing toward the back, with stiff shoulders and quiet eyes. The room hummed with something Luce hadn't felt in years. Not fear, not sorrow. Expectation. She stood backstage behind a worn curtain, the kind with embroidered edges that looked hand-stitched by grandmothers. The smell of dust and old candles hung in the air. Her palms were sweating. Cassian stood behind her, arms crossed. He hadn't said much that morning, just helped get the girls settled with the nuns who were watching them for the day. He knew this moment was hers. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked, not unkindly. Luce exhaled. "No. But I need to." He nodded. "Then I'll be right here." She stepped onto the makeshift stage, boots clicking against the wooden floor. The room quieted. A few faces nodded in greeting, recognizing her from the trial, from the newspaper stories that followed. Others had never seen her before, but leaned forward with eyes wide, needing what she might say. The host, a woman named Clara with short gray hair and kind eyes, gestured her forward. "Please welcome Luz Maria Delgado." Soft applause followed, then silence. Luz gripped the podium. She didn't have paper. She hadn't written a speech. What she had was the truth and the scar it had left across her life. "When I was 17, she began, voice low but clear. I thought marriage would save me. My family was poor. Santos Aguirre offered money. I thought I was lucky." She let the silence hold. But he didn't buy a wife. He bought control. Gasps. Nods. Someone near the front reached for a tissue. She told them the story, not the one the newspapers had watered down, but the real one. The knots in her wrists, the frostbite on her toes, the way Santos used silence like a weapon and rage like punctuation. And then her escape, her daughters, the mountain, the rifle. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She just stood tall and said, "They tried to bury me in silence, but I've learned this: your voice is the one thing they can't take unless you give it away. And I'm done giving." A wave of stillness passed through the room. Then applause, not polite, not forced, fierce, long. A few women rose to their feet. Afterward, they came to her in waves. Survivors, sisters, grandmothers. One young girl, no older than 15, hugged her so hard she could barely breathe. "You gave me permission," the girl whispered. "Permission." Luce smiled through the tears she hadn't let fall on stage. "You don't need permission. You've always had the right." That night, the director of the shelter offered her a spot on the traveling panel they were organizing. A series of talks from Albuquerque to Durango. "Just speak when you feel ready," she said. "Or not at all. But what you did today saved someone." Luce nodded slowly. "I'll do it." The next morning, the newspapers had her name again. But this time, the headline didn't label her a runaway. It called her something else. Mother. Survivor. Witness. Cassian clipped the article, folding it carefully into his journal. He didn't say much about it, just kept that look in his eye, that silent, steady pride. But the new attention brought something else. By the third day in Santa Fe, Luce noticed a man following her. Not close, not obvious, but there, at the bakery, at the chapel, even outside the shelter. He wore a brown coat and a wide-brimmed hat, sunglasses even indoors. He never spoke to her, never approached, but he never smiled either. Elias noticed too. "You want me to run his face through the sheriff's board?" he asked. Cassian said no. "Not yet. Let's see what he wants." They found out soon enough. And that evening, as the family returned to the safe house, they found the door open. The girls were safe thanks to the nuns who'd taken them out for an evening walk. But the house had been searched. Drawers emptied. Luce's speech notes torn apart. A message etched into the wall with the tip of a knife. She lied. Cassian scanned the room with a hunter's eyes. He's not random. This is personal. Elias found a patch near the back door. A badge, but not a lawman's. A private bounty token, issued by the Aguirre family to hired guns decades ago. Luce's heart dropped. "There are more," she said. Cassian nodded. "And not all of them wear chains." They moved quickly, left Santa Fe that night, took a back trail through the hills, riding without lights. Mama Chelo whispered a protection chant over the girls. Elias rode with his rifle across his lap. That night, under a canopy of stars, Luce stared into the fire and said, "I thought the trial was the end. I thought once the truth came out, it would be done." "It's never done," Cassian said. "Not when power's involved. You tore something down. Now they're trying to build it back with fear. What do I do?" He looked at her. "Keep speaking. Keep standing. That's how you win." She nodded slowly, then quieter. "But what if I can't protect the girls next time you can?" he said. "Because you won't be alone." The next day, they arrived in Chimayo, where the panel was scheduled to speak next. A small adobe town nestled against the hills, it felt safer, more guarded. The sheriff there knew Cassian and offered to post deputies at the chapel where the event was planned. Luce stood in the sanctuary alone before the crowd arrived, staring at the empty chairs. She whispered to the silence, "This time I speak louder." And when she stepped onto that stage, she didn't hesitate. She looked every woman in the eye, every man too, and said, "If silence is survival, then truth is revolution." Luce's rising visibility brings allies and enemies alike. A journalist offers to help publish her full story, but insists on digging deeper into Santos's past. What they uncover threatens not only Luce's safety, but Cassian's legacy. A secret from his own bloodline emerges, one that could tear everything apart. The old rail station in Taos buzzed with quiet energy as dusk painted the adobe buildings in warm gold. Luce stood near the edge of the platform, scarf tugged high against the cold, watching the train cars shift and creak in the fading light. Cassian was late, which wasn't like him. He'd gone to speak with an old contact, someone who once worked ranch security for the Aguirre family, about the man in the brown coat. That bounty marker they found wasn't a relic. Someone was still handing them out. She adjusted her coat and glanced down at her youngest daughter, Sol, who clung to her hand, with a stick of sugarcane in her mouth and hair braided tight. The other two girls were nearby, with Mama Chelo and Elias playing a quiet game with flat stones and whispered rules that only made sense to children. The train hissed. A door opened, and from it stepped a stranger who would change everything. He was lean, mid-40s maybe, with a camera slung over one shoulder and a notebook tucked under one arm. His jacket was city-cut, worn from travel, but clean. The kind of man who'd smelled a story from miles away and followed it like a bloodhound. His eyes met Luce's before he even stepped onto the ground. "Miss Delgado?" he asked. Luce hesitated. "Depends who's asking." He offered a small, respectful smile. "Name's Joel O'Shea. I write for the Colorado Sentinel. Heard your story in Santa Fe. Been chasing threads ever since." She didn't speak. "I'm not here to pry," he said, "but there's more to Santos Aguirre than people think. And your name's been whispered around places where men don't usually care about justice." Luce narrowed her eyes. "You came all this way for gossip?" He shook his head. "I came because your voice shook something loose, and I think the story you told isn't the only one that needs daylight." Cassian arrived then, stepping off a borrowed mule hat, low rifle strapped. One look at O'Shea and his whole body shifted. Protective. Ready. "This one bothering you?" he asked Luce quietly. She shook her head but didn't look away from the reporter. "He says there's more to Santos." Cassian crossed his arms. "We know that." "No," O'Shea said. "I mean, more in your direction." That made them both pause. He flipped open his notebook. "I found something strange in the old land deeds filed in Rio Arriba County. A small ranch bought under an alias 2 decades ago. Owner listed as a man named Corwin Red Elk." "Know the name?" Cassian flinched. Luce looked at him. "That your father?" Cassian nodded once. "He died before I was 10. Left the land to my mother." O'Shea continued. "Turns out Corwin worked as a foreman for the Aguirre family back in the early years. He disappeared under unknown circumstances after testifying about illegal land seizures. Guess who led that land grab? Santos's father," Cassian muttered. O'Shea nodded. "This wasn't just about family politics or bad marriages. The Aguirres have been erasing people for decades, people who stood in their way. Corwin was one of them. That ledger your midwife found, I think it ties back further than anyone knew." Luce felt a deep, slow chill crawl up her spine. "You saying this feud didn't start with me?" she said. "No," O'Shea replied. "It started long before. And the reason they came after you so hard might not be just because you ran. Might be because you married into a bloodline they couldn't bury the first time." Cassian's jaw tightened. "So they tried again." O'Shea handed him a copy of the deed and a transcript from the old court testimony. "You need to read this, especially before the trial next week. This isn't just about Santos anymore. It's about everything his family built and the people they buried to do it." That night, Cassian sat by the fire with the documents in his lap, silent. Luce didn't push. She just poured him coffee and sat beside him, her hand resting lightly on his. He knew, Cassian said finally. My father knew what they were doing. He tried to stop them. He got killed for it. Luce leaned in. And now they're coming for his son. I should have seen it coming, he muttered. You couldn't, she said gently. They don't come at you in the open. They hide behind law and paper and fear. He looked at her eyes heavy. Then we bring them out into the light. The next day, they traveled to Española to meet with a local lawyer, a friend of Elias's, who agreed to help them file a countersuit. If they could connect the land thefts to Santos's current holdings, they could freeze his family's assets, cut off the bounty money, and weaken his reach. But time was short. The trial was 6 days away. And just as they started building the case, another message arrived. This one burned into the wood outside their temporary lodging. Red elk bleeds next. Elias doubled security. Mama Chelo set herbs on every windowsill. The girls were moved again, this time to a hidden convent in Taos Pueblo. Cassian started sleeping with one eye open, but Luce refused to retreat. I didn't walk out of that mountain to hide again, she told them. We make them afraid, not the other way around. Cassian looked at her, something fierce rising behind his exhaustion. We go public. O'Shea set up the meeting. A printed article scheduled for the Sunday paper, complete with quotes, names, and the old testimonies that had been buried for 20 years. The headline would read, Aguirre Legacy Built on Blood and Stolen Land. Luce read the draft. Her name was front and center. Her story opened the piece. But Cassian's family history was there too, and with it a new sense of clarity. We're not victims, she said. We're the reckoning. That night before dawn broke, someone fired a shot into their cabin window. No one was hurt. The girls were safe. But it was no warning. It was a declaration, and they took it as such. Luce loaded her rifle. Cassian checked the powder. Elias reinforced the doors. We face them in court, Luce said. And if they want more after that, well, they'll know where to find us. Cassian gave her a long look. Truth has a price, he said. I'm not afraid to pay it. She stood in the doorway as the sun broke over the trees, wind in her hair, fire in her chest. She whispered to herself, This started before me, but it ends with me. The courthouse in Santa Fe was different this time. Not because of the bricks or the benches, they were still the same dusty red and worn smooth by decades of bodies shifting under pressure. But because of the people. They weren't there to gawk. Not all of them, anyway. Many had come to stand behind Luz. Women from the shelters, elders from Chimayo, farmers from Taos who remembered the Red Elk family, and even strangers who had only read her story and felt something shift in their chest. Cassian walked beside her through the courthouse doors, not in front like a protector, not behind like a shadow, but next to her. The girls weren't here. Too dangerous. They were still with the sisters, safe and quiet in a sunlit chapel on the hill. Luce carried a small photograph of them in her pocket, folded into the palm of her hand, like a prayer. Inside the courtroom, Santos Aguirre looked smaller than before. Not physically, he still wore his fine coat and dark hair slicked back, but hollow. His eyes darted more, his lips pursed tighter. The air around him no longer obeyed him. The legacy he'd worn like a badge had begun to rot under scrutiny. On the prosecution table sat a stack of documents nearly 6 inches thick. Ledgers, land records, testimonies, old maps and notarized letters from men long dead, unearthed and reprinted. Joel O'Shea's article had broken something wide open, and now it flooded in like spring thaw. Judge Merriweather called the room to order. The trial began. Luce testified again, this time with less weight in her throat. The words didn't come easier, they still burned, but they came with certainty. She spoke not just of what had been done to her, but of what she had done since. Of healing, of standing, of choosing truth even when it hurt. The courtroom listened. Some people cried. Even a few men. Cassian was called to the stand. He spoke little, but his voice carried. He explained how his father died defending a stolen land deed. How Cassian himself had been tracked for years, not for crimes, but for knowing the wrong history. The Aguirres hadn't just punished dissent. They'd buried it. And Cassian, by protecting Luce, had brought it all back up. Elias testified too calmly, laying out the bounty network, the men they fought in the snow, the message carved into the wood, the rifle shot through the window. Mama Chelo sat beside Luce the whole time, occasionally muttering prayers under her breath. At one point, she leaned in and whispered, "You're winning, mija, even if it doesn't feel like it yet." Santos's defense team tried to redirect arguing property disputes, calling Luce emotionally unstable, saying Cassian had poisoned her against her husband, that she was exaggerating her injuries. But their case fell flat. Because this time Luce wasn't alone. The evidence was overwhelming, and Santos, though he sat tall, was unraveling. When Joel O'Shea was called to the stand and presented the notarized testimony of Corwin Red Elk, written just weeks before his disappearance, Santos's face drained of color. In it, Corwin had named every man involved in the land theft scheme, including Santos's father and uncle. The testimony hadn't been filed in court. It had been hidden in a church archive. Now it was public. Luce watched as the courtroom took it all in. Decades of silence broken by a man's final confession and a woman's unyielding voice. When the jury left to deliberate, the air in the room stayed heavy. Luce stood near the window and stared out at the plaza beyond. She didn't need a verdict to know what had changed. Cassian stepped beside her. "Whatever happens," he said, "you broke the cycle." She nodded. "I didn't mean to. I just wanted to survive." "You did more than survive." The jury returned just after noon. Their verdict was read aloud. "Guilty. On all charges." Santos sat motionless as the gavel fell. Judge Merriweather looked him square in the eye. "This court sentences you to life imprisonment without parole. Not just for what you did to Miss Delgado, but for every act of cruelty and deception that followed, wrapped in power and silence. You are no longer above the law." Luce didn't cry. She didn't cheer. She just breathed. For the first time in what felt like years, she took a breath without fear behind it. Outside, the sun was shining. People gathered. Some clapped. Some offered hands. A few women simply stood with her and said nothing, because they didn't need to. Their eyes said it all. You did it. You did it for us. That night back at the house they were renting in Chimayo, Luce lit a small candle for the life she'd buried, her old self, the girl who once believed obedience could save her. She whispered goodbye to that girl and then kissed her daughters goodnight. Cassian was on the porch tuning the old guitar Elias had fixed for him. "You think it's over?" she asked. He shook his head, tuning a string. "Justice like this, it's never over. But the worst of it is behind us." She sat beside him, head against his shoulder. "I want to build something." "We will." "A home," she said. "A real one. Maybe near the river. With a porch like this and chickens that make too much noise." Cassian smiled. "You deserve that." "No," she said. "The girls do. I'll make sure they never think their pain is supposed to be quiet." They sat in silence as the wind rustled through the dry brush. In the distance, coyotes called to each other. Life didn't pause. It moved. It always had. Luce knew now that healing wasn't a straight line. It bent and broke and rebuilt. But it was possible. And not just for her, for anyone brave enough to walk through the fire and not come out the same. Somewhere down the trail, there'd be more stories. More women standing up. More men like Cassian, who carried their father's names, but not their sins. And maybe, just maybe, a world that listened the first time. As the candle flickered low and her daughters slept safe and warm, Luce whispered to herself, "This is what freedom feels like. Not loud, not easy, but earned." And she would spend the rest of her days making sure no one ever had to earn it the way she did. Again. The story closes on the truth that justice is not a one-time act, but a commitment, a continuous fight, carried by those who choose truth over silence, healing over hiding. Luce's journey from victim to voice is not just her own. It belongs to every person who's ever been told to keep quiet, endure, and disappear. Through love, truth, and community, the story reminds us some cycles break not with vengeance, but with courage.